Okay, it's 11:35, and we've got 60 minutes for this panel. We've got a lot to get through, so I think we should sort of kick off. And if people come in late, well, it's their hard luck. So this is the Financing the Future and Paying for Innovation panel. Yesterday there was a lot of discussion about innovative medicines and society's capacity to be able to actually pay the prices that pharmaceutical companies are wanting. Interesting, unlike many of the conferences I go to, there was a clear divide in the audience. Clearly, there's a much greater diversity than what I normally see. And when the former Roche boss reminded the audience that the pharmaceutical companies are businesses and not charities, there was a chill in the room, which was actually pretty good because at that time the air conditioning hadn't been working that great, so it was all a bit warm. So it was probably welcome. As I say, the title of the panel is Financing the Future and Paying for Innovation. And in the blurb that probably enticed you into the room in the first place, it focused on precision medicine and posed the question, with its advent, will that trigger a shift to what was described as precision payment? And more importantly, if the financial incentives aren't in place, will this actually inhibit the enthusiasm for innovation? So we pulled together a panel that represents different parts of the drug development value chain. And we're going to discuss some of the challenges that both industry and society faces and offer some possible solutions. So let me introduce them. So right over on the far side is Hakan Göker. Hakan is a senior investment director at Merck Ventures. That's the corporate venture capital arm of the German pharma company Merck KGaA. We're allowed to call it Merck here, aren't we?
We are called.
Yeah. He's been an investor in early stage innovative companies for about 12 years. I think I first met you when you were at Atlas.
Yes.
And then you moved over to EastCap
Yes.
Ventures. And he's on the boards of, did you say 12 companies the last time?
No, not there yet, 10.
10 companies on either side of the Atlantic. So he's got a hell of a lot of air miles. Next to Hakan is Catherine Pickering. Catherine is the CEO of a newly minted oncology biotech company called iOnctura. iOnctura, okay. Okay, and that actually has backing from Hakan's fund and also support from CR UK. Prior to that, she led the global oncology and immune oncology partnering at Merck, the German one. Next to Catherine is Alex Gray. Alex is the Chief Medical Officer at Idea Pharma. This is a business that specializes in helping companies navigate the R&D pipeline, especially from phase 2 onwards. And the company's client base includes some of the world's most prominent pharma companies. So, and then next to Alex is Jane Spink. Jane joined the Genetic Alliance UK as CEO as recently as April 2017. Genetic Alliance, for those of you are not familiar, is a national charity representing about 180 patient organizations with a mission to raise awareness of genetic conditions and improve the quality of services and information available to patients and their families. Prior to joining Genetic Alliance, Jane was the CEO of Tuberous Sclerosis Association for 5 years. And then finally, Clive Badman. He works for both GSK, where he's VP of pre-competitive R&D activities, and also the University of Strathclyde. His focus is to improve the economics of R&D, ensure a better return on investment by improving supply chain dynamics through continuous manufacturing, but also reduce the cost of getting drugs to patients. At the hub of that effort is CMAC, which is a technology innovation center that has support from a number of different sources, including a number of tier one pharma companies. My name is Mike Ward. I'm a journalist. I've covered this industry for just over 33 years. And currently I manage 64 journalists employed across the globe at Scrip and The Pink Sheet. So let's kick off. So just one point. Yesterday I was really impressed by the level of audience participation in the room. So it'd be great if anybody's got any questions or any comments that they would like to make about anything any of the panelists say, just throw your hand up in the air and we'll bring you into the conversation, and that'd be great. So I'm going to start off with, essentially a sort of a tricky but scene-setting question. The blurb in the advertising said this panel was going to be looking at precision medicine. Yesterday afternoon, some of the discussions that actually took place in the big room, it was clear that precision medicine means different things to different people. For industrialists, it meant medicines that are focused on specific patient groups and a useful way to identify those who might get benefit from a drug. But for others, it's the means of delivering a much more patient-centric solution. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of throw it out and sort of ask the panelists, precision medicine, what does it mean to you? So Hakan, do you want to? You can have the first shot.
Well, I mean, by definition, one hopes that medicine is precise when you're taking it, that it actually resolves whatever ailment that you're suffering from. So the term has evolved over the years. So when you look at what precision medicine meant 10 years ago, it's slightly different than today. I think there was a peak where precision medicine was seen as personalized medicine, even down to the single patient. And as we have not seen much success of those, from pricing, cost of goods, even sometimes benefit side, that is kind of coming back towards medicines that at least address the specific type of your disease that biology has read out over the years. So when you look at many cancers, I think over the years, they have been better defined through their molecular pathways that give rise to the disease. So hitting that molecular pathway rather than bulldozing it with some kind of general cell killing mechanism is what I see, at least on the oncology side, in precision medicine. In the orphan genetic diseases, that's obviously something that is a lot more meaningful, where you know what's happening and you can literally hit that. That's my understanding, Mike.
Yeah. Catherine?
That's a hard act to follow. I can only echo actually what Hakan says. For me, especially, I can only talk about oncology, but certainly now in the field of immuno-oncology, finding the right patient population to fit with your drug is crucial. And I think regulators are also pushing now the precision medicine. So as Hakan said, really making sure that the drug that you're giving a patient is actually going to have an effect. So I think absolutely the field is essential now, rather than a nice to have, to really have a companion diagnostic that dictates which drug is the right drug for the right patient population. So.
Alex, do you have a different opinion, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always a risk of conflating precision at a pharmacologic level with the patient, and I think it's actually something. I do a lot of work in oncology as well. I think it's something that perhaps the industry hasn't fully embraced yet, actually. So there are targets that are like PSMA and prostate cancer that are almost ubiquitous, but it's a great target because it's only on prostate cancer cells, so we hope that will work out very nicely. And then there are nicely defined segments like, EGFR in lung cancer, 20-25% of the lung cancer population. But the idea that 20% will get benefit out of that drug is not right. There are a lot of other factors. So to me, I think that more global characterisation of the patient around their likelihood of getting the right balance of risk and benefit is the way I would see it. And I think if you talk to clinicians, that's their view of how they treat their patients, and of course patients' view of what they're anticipating.
Okay. So Jane, so you know, from you guys are a lot closer to patients than some of the other colleagues.
Hakan made a good point about precision medicines in the context of rare and genetic conditions targeting underlying pathways, but even within that, even in a rare patient group, a particular medicine may only be appropriate for a specific subset. And so for me, I think it's not just about the matter of medicines, it's also about patient-centric care, particularly where you have a condition that may be a multi-system condition, may be very different from one patient to another, even under the sort of context of a single rare or genetic condition. And it is about patient centricity and making sure that we have an informed patient whose preferences, views and needs are taken into consideration in the process of making informed decisions about their care together with their caregivers. And I think that if you can tie all of those things together, the ability to specifically target particular manifestations of a condition in appropriate patients together with precision care, then you increase efficiency, you increase value for money, and most importantly, you improve the experience and outcomes for the patient.
Right, thanks. Clive?
I'm not sure I can talk knowledgeably about precision, but for the last few years of my full-time engagement with GSK, I was responsible for the clinical trial supply chain. And of course, as people in this room will know, then you're making packs for clinical supply that are specific for the patient. So it's very personalized in its approach. And I think actually we'll learn a lot from clinical supplies in terms of supplying personalized medicines in the future. I think where we need to go in that whole field of personalized medicines is much more linking diagnostics with the treatment itself, and then being able to give a much more targeted treatment. And I'll happily talk more about that later.
Yeah, good. So in fact, one of the other sort of topics we're going to sort of focus on is innovation. So again, it's kind of interesting because I think a lot of the sort of the conversation around innovation tends to just be about drugs. But clearly there are opportunities for other parts of innovation that affect this. So Clive, I mean, sort of, you know, where do you see the opportunities for innovation?
Right, thanks, Mike. I think if you start with the payer, essentially, if you look at the National Health Service in the UK, or indeed any health service wherever it is in the world, then we have a position which is untenable. The costs are rising. We heard yesterday about the aging populations, the growing populations. And so the model that we have, it just is not suitable for the future. It will not continue. In the model in the UK, where we spend around about £150 billion a year on the National Health Service, 10% of that goes for the cost of drugs. And so there's much that we can do with innovation to try and reduce the cost of goods, of those drugs. But, you know, if we were successful in reducing that 15 billion by 10%, it would only bring a 1.5 billion saving. I'm much more interested in looking at how we can use the supply chain and digital applications to tackle the remaining 90% of that 150 million. So if we can reduce the cost of the 135 million by 10%, then we're beginning to make some fairly substantial savings in our health service, and that puts us in a much better place. And I think that there are many innovations that we have at the moment. If I've got time to go on and mention one or two of them, Mike mentioned that I'm the industrial chair of CMAC, Continuous Manufacturing and Crystallization. I do think that continuous manufacturing is going to enable us to shorten our supply time considerably. Currently, our supply cycle is anything from 12 to 24 months in the industry, and we can reduce that to perhaps 3 months in introducing continuous manufacturing. But that's only one technology, and you'll see that Remedies is a partner of this meeting. There's a Remedies stand outside, and in Remedies, which came out of CMAC, Remedies is looking at reconfiguring the medicine's end-to-end supply chain. And we're looking at a number of platforms there. Continuous is amongst them, but we're looking at the use of supercritical fluids, a greater use of enzymes in manufacturing, new packaging technologies, electronic applications in packaging, whether that's an electronic label or devices for monitoring your product. There are a raft of ideas out there that I believe can, when linked with digital manufacturing, when linked with devices and diagnostics, can actually transform the supply chain that we have.
Right. So we will come back to explore that point much further. Jane, so from sort of the Genetic Alliance point of view, you know, where do you see the opportunity for innovations?
I think that unmet need is a fantastic driver for innovation, and we have seen in the context of genetic and rare conditions that the drive to develop diagnostics and to develop treatments has had benefits in terms of more common conditions. And I think that equally, that innovation in the context of regulatory considerations applied to rare disease medicines, to orphan products, and to their development in trial have had an impact on regulatory and clinical trial design thinking for more common and for stratified and precision medicines. And I think that the tail end of that is that we are seeing that in the same way that rare and genetic conditions haven't been necessarily amenable to the development of conventional types of treatments, that products arising from clinical research aren't always amenable to conventional ways of thinking about ensuring access and thinking about ensuring affordability and assessing the value of those products. So I think that rare disease medicines offer us an opportunity to innovate in the field of health technology assessment and in considerations related to delivering more targeted treatments to patients.
Right. So Alex, I mean, you sort of, you know, advise, you know, a lot of companies, you know, what are the sort of the innovation challenges that, you know, that they face that you normally have to deal with?
My God, a lot at the moment, I think. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of factors in this. I liked Clive's comment actually about a need for perhaps a more grown-up approach from both sides of the fence, from payers as well as pharma. I think the current model has driven the industry down routes of rare diseases, segmented populations, and I think there is a risk as well as an upside in that. I think we're leaving aside some conditions on the table because the business model around them is, you know, too risky now. You know, the 15,000 patient 5-year cardiovascular studies. I think we're seeing a, you know, less appetite to go into those spaces because the kind of incremental benefit they may bring may not sit with the way the payers are going to think at the other end. I mean, I would go back, actually, there was a very interesting paper published a couple of years ago about what happened to AstraZeneca's pipeline before the current management went into place. And they looked at drivers of failure, and as I'm sure everybody around a very educated audience know, there's very, very substantial differences in the rates of attrition in the big companies. So getting away from biotechs where, you know, may only have a couple of assets, where you're looking at broad-based portfolios within companies, their efficiency at getting things through to market and also the success in taking those products through the regulatory system and the payer system so that they get financial reward at the other end differs very substantially. And that's, I guess, that's what I spend most of my life doing, is looking at how you can get better at that stuff. It was very interesting in this paper. I'm not even sure why AstraZeneca allowed anybody to publish it, because it was kind of like showing them the interior of the cupboard, as it were. But it was very frank and very bare, and I think that there were two major conclusions they came to, one of which I agree with and one of which I agree less with. The first one was that if only we were better at translational science, we'd up our success rate. And that, of course, is a truism, but that's one of the hardest things to fix, and it's going to take a long time, and we don't know whether we can. I mean, there is no, it's not a binary, we fix it, we don't. You know, we'll have increments in that. The bit they spent less time on, and what their portfolio very clearly showed, was most of their failures sat in mid-phase clinical development. So it was their decision-making between phases 2 and 3, and they were using a very 1990s model of giving their drugs to broad populations, and lo and behold, they tended to fail on the way through. But I think there are a lot of lessons out of that approach about how we make decisions between first in man and then going on further, about honing down our proposition from a clinical perspective, you know, what patients and payers want to see at the other end. And I think where the maturity is needed is, you know, pharma still has some distance to run to be clear what it means by precision medicine, that they're not still trying to keep the populations broad for commercial reward as opposed to, you know, higher clinical success rates. But I think the payers need to grow up to and realise that, you know, with that kind of level of investment, the return has to be commensurate with some of the investments, which are increasingly large, as we all know. So I don't see it from one end, and I think, as everybody else has said, there's plenty of opportunity to innovate in terms of the way we run trials. There's a lot of that going on. Obviously, you know, basket trials that are saving time, they're saving money. There are risks in those approaches as well, for sure. Some of those approaches will answer some of these questions, but as I say, I think there are other issues about access to market that are beyond that, and we need to be more collaborative to make those things work better.
Right. Yeah, and we'll come back to the point around payer, if there are sort of, you know, innovative ways that we can actually, you know, pay for this stuff. So Catherine, you just started a new company, so clearly you spotted an opportunity that is going to be innovative. So, you know, when you sort of look at that whole sort of oncology, which is a sort of a very, very busy place, what is the potential? I mean, when you went on the roadshow, what was it that you were selling to investors?
So maybe I just want to comment first on the first question about pricing. I'm not a pricing expert, but I think I've been in oncology for many years, and I've always heard people say that payers will pay for innovation and good drugs, and I think that's still true. That still holds true. I think when you look at the field of CAR-T, you know, they're huge prices, but we really have the ability to cure cancer with these drugs. Not all cancers, certain cancers. And I think payers recognise when they really see a benefit that they pay for that benefit. And I don't think there's anything different there. I think it will stay true wherever you are, in the UK, whether you're in the US. So for me also, innovation doesn't necessarily also tie to drugs, as you said. It's so, you know, I'm a deal maker. I've been a deal maker all of my life, and I think what pharma has recognised and is still recognising is they have to do things differently. They have to develop drugs differently. They have to perhaps allow others to take more of an active role in the development of drugs for them to then bring in later. And I think they're all starting to recognise that. So, you know, for me, I saw an opportunity because Merck is in the field of checkpoint inhibition, and I think so is every big pharma in the field of checkpoint inhibition. And you know, it will be very interesting when the price wars start on checkpoint inhibitors, because it's coming, it will. And people are trying to differentiate their checkpoint inhibitor based on combinations. And I think that's where I saw the opportunity. So my company has 3 or 4 assets that combine with checkpoint inhibitors, and I believe that it will be the combination asset that will really hold the value in looking forward 5 to 7 years' time. It won't be the checkpoint inhibitor, and you know, every pharma that has a PD-L1, PD-1 checkpoint inhibitor in their pipeline is really looking at different models, innovative deal models, to maximise the value of their pipeline. And for me, that's hugely exciting.
Right.
So,
Can I say quickly
Yeah.
one thing about that? Because I think that's exactly right, and I think it reminds us of one basic tenet that if you gave the same molecule to 2 or 3 different companies, would they have the same level of success? Well, we know they don't, because we've got all the data we ever need to know that that's not the case. So what you're describing, I think, is about how you bolt value into an asset by the way you study it. And that's actually not the way pharma had operated for many years. They threw it at lots of people and hoped it would work. All of these companies now see their success in that intimate design in mid-phase, and I think that's why it's so critical. And if you look at the evidence, that's also what the evidence shows. If we get it right there, we'll do a better job for everybody, for patients, for payers, for the companies. The risk is we believe that the science will answer all of it, and I'm a scientist and I don't believe that's true at all, actually. There's just way too much unknown to fix that quickly. But sorry.
it's actually a really good point, because I think in the field of checkpoint inhibition, you see the top 5 having a very similar molecule in their pipeline. They're not identical, of course, but they're all very similar, and they're all developing them in a very different way. You know, innovative clinical trial, basket trials, deal structures, combination strategies, pricing strategies. You know, it's really interesting to see how different companies are doing this.
And but that's all so that they will have success in the clinic. At what point is the patient thought about?
I think the patient is behind everything. You know, I didn't hear the comment about, you know, their pharma are businesses, not charities.
Yeah.
I think it's unfair to say that pharma only focus on the financials. It's always about the patient. The patient comes first, and of course, you know, they have to make money, otherwise they can't develop drugs for patients. So.
Okay. So Hakan, your job, I guess, is to scout for new opportunities all the time. So that means you've probably got a very, very sort of finely tuned radar in where the opportunities are. So can you sort of share with us where the differences are going to come from?
I mean, I hope I have that radar. We all do as the venture guys. Just one thing to go back to this thing, Mike, on innovation. I think we all talk about innovation and how to innovate and blah. I mean, innovation itself is a very Darwinian concept, right? You have to have selective pressure to think, shit, I'm going to be wiped out, so I need to do something. It's just how, you know, creatures behave and how business models evolve. What we struggle with in the early stage financing in most of the companies, I mean, pharma does its own thing, you know, and once a year they have budget cuts or budget increases and everyone has to follow. It's a difficult one to push so much innovation in a large organization when, you know, taking quick decisions has not been their forte, because just by the nature of the beast, you have to go through multiple layers of yeses and nos. What we struggle with on the early stage is actually trying to I mean, most of the money that we invest in as venture people, you know, putting aside the corporate venture side, is what are called alternative assets in asset management companies. Usually 1 to 2% of their investment allocation, and venture and biotech venture is minute portion of that 1 to 2%. So you need to actually try and create something meaningful that people in pharma would think, well, actually, this is quite interesting, and maybe it'll solve my problem of trying to get something to the patient quicker. And the way that we look at it on the innovation side is that what we have seen over the last couple of years is actually innovation in clinical trial design, which you guys also touched upon, on how to get a trial as meaningful as possible without going to thousands of patients and spending millions and millions and wasting your time, money, those patients' time and expectations, And then end of 3 years, you think, well, it's kind of grey and it's not going to get approved. So is there something that you can do in the phase 1 in oncology? Certainly possible. You have these rolling trials, you know, target engagement. You have to understand the biology, and then you can really innovate, push that innovation and understanding to running the trial itself. Similar in CNS, where you have, you know, PET traces and target engagement markers. So that's what we would really want to see more of it. And kind of flipping back to your question to me now, this is also what we look at in New Deal. So, you know, cardiology is a good point that my colleague mentioned here. It's a difficult area to finance, so it's not in our remit as Merck Ventures, but cardiology has been a difficult area for 10, 11 years, because what we have seen is the technology, not the technologies has been actually quite interesting, but the new drugs that have kind of come to the forefront, at least at early stages, have only been small incremental benefits to what exists in the market. And no one is going to pour down whatever hundreds of millions to do a phase 3 for a drug that you can, you know, get for whatever, 5 cents somewhere. So we try to focus on things that really make a paradigm change in the clinic. In oncology, autoimmune, fertility, this is the areas that we look at because of, you know, the strategic outlook of our mother company. And, you know, try to go for things that pretty much don't exist today, or poorly served patient groups, drugs that don't work. I mean, you know, just give a couple of examples. I mean, Catherine explained the Iantura thing, which I'm on the board of, on what we're trying to do there. Some of my other companies, we're going for Alzheimer's, huge and expensive development pathway. But Aceneuron, which is one of our companies, the CEO is walking around. I mean, they have a mechanism where at least you can test the concept and biology in a subgroup of patients very clearly. Another one in endometriosis, humongous market, nothing really works that well apart from giving you huge side effects where many patients say, I'm not sure if I actually like the pain or so if I like the disease or the drug better, because it's so, you know, it's such a dilemma. So those are the bits that we're trying to look at, and how do we do that? We speak to a lot of scientists, both internally and externally, and university, tech transfer offices, a couple of similar organizations that are trying to kind of pull these emerging science groups together where they can prepare something which is a bit more digestible to people like ourselves, where we have to go through so much deal flow that you need to catch, you know, it needs to catch your eye.
So in your due diligence, do you engage with patient groups to sort of, you know, ascertain whether this is actually
We
what
do.
they want as a solution?
I mean, quite a number of our companies are working on big indications. So, you know, it's you know, getting your chief medical officer who has an understanding in the field is perhaps enough. In smaller diseases like what Aceneuron is doing in tauopathies and progressive supranuclear palsy, they have got patient groups, and to be able to design that trial and how much we will need and how long we need to continue, we really need to get in touch with the patient groups to understand, you know, what are the expectations of the patients, the families, the carers, I mean, it goes to a stage where even your PI, your clinician who's going to do the trial, if you don't meet the certain criteria for the patients and the families, they would not do your trial. So it's very key, especially in those smaller group indications.
Right. So yesterday, Dr. Humer, he was obviously being a big defender of the industry and told the audience that the pharmaceutical industry was the engine room of innovation and did lots of innovation. But in the sort of the 3 decades that I've been covering the industry, you know, if one looks at the sort of the portfolios of big pharma, most of it has been brought in from somewhere else. So, you know, when we sort of, you know, talk about innovation, who actually is best placed to to do innovation. So, Alex, do you want to sort of kick off first?
That's a very interesting question, and I'm sure there are some people in the room who've seen the consequence of different decisions from large organisations on that topic. And I think I overheard what I'm sure wasn't a private conversation in the corridor here today about what GSK are going through about weeding out which bits of their business they want to focus on in terms of R&D powerhouse going forwards. And I guess I'd go back to what I said, which is if you look historically, very different success rates within these organisations at moving things forward. And it's very interesting why that's true. There's certainly evidence that that systemically within certain organisations there can be a history of incorrect decision making, if I could use that term, i.e. poor success rates on the way through. So I don't think it's all as smoke and mirrors as sometimes we might imagine. But I mean, I would, your comment about is it all going to come in-house? I mean, obviously the models have changed very substantially. There wouldn't be people sitting here who do this kind of work. There's a lot more collaboration going on outside of single pharma sponsorship as well. I mean, I know Johnson & Johnson Janssen, who I've worked with a lot in oncology, have got a lot of collaborative work with all sorts of institutions where they're not binding these people into a deal at the front end of the process, right? I mean, that's the big issue. Back in the day, we were effectively putting a contract on the table. We had lots of lawyers in the room. We said, right, we'll give you some money, but at the end of it, we want the output of this. That's the way it's going to work. I don't think that's tenable going forwards in a lot of circumstances. And I think Janssen, and I mean, there are other people who are doing this, have got exactly the right idea, which is build a partnership with these people, finance them. They should be the right people for those people you finance to come back to if you've had the right kind of relationship with them on the way through. And if you're investing in them and you keep that relationship, in the right terms, I think that's a much, much better platform. Of course, there's risk. The point is that this is a very high-risk business with lots of elements of risk all the way through the process. And I think if we only focus on those kind of risks without looking at the risks that we set up in our industry ourselves, again, that's what I meant about the growing up bit, by the way. I think we can't perennially blame payers and regulators for all of what goes on here. I think it's more complex than that. We have to get our own house in order as well, definitely. Okay. I'm more contrite than Franz Hugh was.
Yeah, sure. So Clive, I mean, you actually you're so head of pre-competitive activities at GSK, but also you sort of at the University of Strathclyde. So you're kind of in two camps there. Yeah. So how important is sort of the academic engine for innovation, and is there anything that people could do better?
Well, first of all, the academic engine is absolutely important, vitally important to us. And are there things we can do better? Yes. I'm going to focus on manufacturing rather than on molecules. But if you look at the pharma industry between 2000 and 2010, in the one area of continuous manufacturing, the industry spent over £1 billion. And they did that in silos. GSK spent 100 million, Pfizer spent about 100 million, Novartis spent a little bit more than that, AstraZeneca spent a little less, but no one got a return on that investment. We were all working in silos, we were all facing pretty much the same problems, but in our own silo. And we made a decision back in 2009 to try and put together a collaboration. We didn't think any one academic institute in the UK would be sufficient to meet the needs that we had for the depths of science and engineering. So we set up a collaboration. CMAC was a collaboration, still is a collaboration of 7 academic institutions in the UK. We started with 3 tier 1 pharmas, GSK, AstraZeneca and Novartis. We've changed some of the academic institutions. We've figured that some weren't giving us what we needed and there were others that we could go to who were better. And we've added a further 5 pharma companies. We've also expanded internationally to form links into Europe and into the US in this area of continuous manufacturing, and we've made a lot of progress. Could it be better? Yes. I think pharma companies tend to treat these collaborations with their collaborations budget. It's not unreasonable, perhaps. But collaborations budgets are relatively small, and if you want to really be disruptive in terms of your approach, you need to think a lot bigger, not just in working with academic institutions, but in thinking about how you translate the output of that into industry.
Right. So how is all that financed then? Is it the big pharma guys putting in all the money, or?
It's so pharma put money in, but we also get government money, government
Right.
funding. We get charity funding coming into it. So it's a mixture of different types of funding going into it. CMAC probably had around about, in its first 5 years of existence, from 2011 to 16, had about 40 million pounds of cash. Pharma put roughly 5 million of that in over that period of time. So good leverage for the pharma companies, but working together is a sure way, I think, of accelerating the adoption of new technologies, and working together with academics helps that.
Right. Right.
It's a question.
Yeah, a comment actually on innovation. I think we're talking about innovation as if certain people set out to be innovative and others don't, which is nonsense, of course. And you only know if something's innovative after it's been on the market for a number of years and you've got all your patient data back. What we're talking about actually is who is taking the risks that can lead to innovation in the future. And of course, the risk-benefit argument is very different for pharmaceutical companies than it is for a startup biotech or an academic. The academic and the biotech has nothing to lose. It's success or nothing. The pharma industry is highly regulated, and it has to meet all those regulations, and it has reputational risks to consider. So the question actually is not where does the innovation come from, or where does the future innovation come from, is how does the industry as a whole work to access those, to make sure that that risk-taking is appropriately rewarded, and that the benefits of that risk-taking gets through to the patients and to the benefit of the business and the industry as a whole.
Can I challenge that a little bit? Sorry.
Okay.
You said, so obviously I've been on both sides, and you said that biotech and academia have nothing to lose. Actually, I would flip that a little bit and say that biotech, and especially biotech, have a lot more to lose than pharma. So, if biotech isn't innovative, they don't raise money, and you end up with no job. Whereas in pharma, you can bury yourself in a pharma company for many years and never innovate and still keep a job. So actually, I think that sometimes reduces innovation in pharma, this lack of risk-taking.
I think, yes. I mean, you're talking about different things. There's innovation at the level of the company, or risk-taking at the level of the company, and risk-taking at the level of the individual. I mean, I know within pharma there are plenty of very high-risk projects. But it's only natural because of the nature of the business that there are going to be higher risk projects coming from outside of pharma industry, because frankly, the pharma industry, as a proportion of all the research and risk-taking in the world, is not the greatest component. So I just challenge this kind of thing, this thinking that, pharma's dull and slow, and biotech's are where all the innovation is. The innovation will come if the two work together.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with
Yeah,
that.
I agree with that too.
You got your point.
Yeah, so Jennifer from Janssen, so when you were talking earlier, Alex, about our model at Johnson & Johnson, that is the combination, right? So we have 4 innovation centers around the world that absolutely at no risk to them, because we know they don't have the capital to start up. They can come in, use our facilities, and innovate. And if something happens, great. And if it doesn't, no loss. Because I think absolutely the model of tomorrow needs to be, you need let's be honest, you need the capital of a big company to bring some of these things to market. And not all of the best ideas come from massive companies. Some do, not all.
Yeah.
A lot of them come
Yeah.
from academia and from biotech. And so both need to work together. But I also think, and this might be, a different perspective coming from somebody from industry like me, but I think, governments also need to get involved. If you look at the AMR problem that we've got, if you look at dementia challenge, you look at some of these massive challenges that are about to hit us, or already starting to hit us. I don't think that the private sector can solve it. I think it needs to be a cooperation of everyone in the system working together to solve these massive challenges. Because what's the point in creating something that will, cure or at least help dementia patients, but no one's going to be able to pay for it? I mean, it's ridiculous. So I actually think we're not talking enough about the involvement of the system, not just of biotech and pharma, but the system to solve the problem.
So, Jane, thank you.
Charities aren't in the business of bringing drugs to the market, but if you trace back the history of, and I haven't undertaken this exercise obviously, but if you trace back the history of a lot of drugs that are now marketed products and available to patients, you'll find at their beginnings a great deal of investment and risk-taking on the part of medical research charities. So a lot of the blue sky research, the basic biomedical, and in some cases early clinical research is funded by the third sector. And in that way, I feel that they help both to feed the pipeline and to de-risk some of the early research for industry. Beyond that, charities also help to sustain, develop and build the research community and the clinical environment that enables industry to undertake clinical studies in the UK. And the risk that they take in participating in trials, when patients participate in trials, particularly first in man, particularly first approaches which might be advanced medicinal products, that is a risk to the patient. And I don't think that there's enough focus on the value that patients and medical research charities bring to innovation. They can also play a role in ensuring that your trials are centred on patients' needs and that they address patient preferences in terms of risks and benefits, which ultimately will lead to more appropriate and palatable products at the end with better compliance. And I think that when you look at particularly rare disease medicines where 1/5 in this country haven't been evaluated and only around half are routinely available, it really points to a failure in the system and in terms of rewarding that risk-taking for the patient and for the patient advocacy and research charities.
I seem to actually recall that the Association of Medical Research Charities did actually put out a number of the sort of what percentage of the sort of the drug R&D spending in the UK actually is attributed to the charities.
From memory, I think the last figure I saw was 16 billion annually,
Yeah.
which is, I think, a phenomenal achievement. But also from that report, I think there was a figure that highlighted that around 1/3 of the medium and smaller size charities which fund research focus that research spend on innovative products.
Yeah. So do you think that the charities get the quid pro quo? Do they get a return?
I don't think that they get the recognition, but I think the important thing is the outcome for the patient and having access to that product at the end. So the onus and really needs to be on the companies in terms of pricing and also on the bodies which decide whether drugs are affordable to come up with an equitable solution where the focus is really on delivering treatments to patients and doing that as quickly as possible. And in the context of orphan products, it's not unusual to see a drug on the market for 3 to 5 years before it's routinely available in this country, and that's simply not acceptable.
Right. So Hakan, I think you're going to raise a point?
I mean, I've passed on that one by now, but
All right.
I think let's move on to maybe the next one.
So, so talking about sort of almost like bankrolling the innovation, whether it's pharma companies, whether it's charities, or I mean, for example, the National Institutes of Health in the States. Okay, the size of their budget. I mean, one of the reasons why the U.S. biotech industry has done so well is because, in fact, there's an awful lot of taxpayers' money has actually gone to incubate a lot of that science very early on. So, sort of just looking at, the sort of sources. I mean, it's sort of Jennifer was sort of saying there is a societal contribution. Do you think that governments need to actually do more to support innovation, particularly sort of around medicine and therapies?
So maybe, kind of as a non-UK person, I can stir a bit of stuff. So, I mean, this is always a political issue, right? We keep comparing ourselves to the US. Well, the US is a single country. When you take that geography and overlap it all over Europe, we have how many countries fitting into half the size of that, right? Everyone with their own nationalistic, we want our hub in the middle of nowhere here, we don't want your hub there, this budget, that budget, then a big shit show, and the, no tweets please on that word, on the European level. And, Brexit, no Brexit, it's going to happen here as well. So, that's the difference, that's the fundamental difference that we just have to kind of embrace and move on with. Can governments do more? Yes, they can. In the more of a setting of the NIH type funding, that there is more money poured into research and good research being rewarded for longer term track periods that the academics, the PIs get. Should the government go into the commercial side? I don't think that's a good idea. I think there are places where the government can really help, really show their help in a more meaningful way than going into perhaps the commercial side. So,
I was just going to comment on that as well, because I think it's great that the NIH puts lots of money into research. Don't get me wrong. They also have a pretty bad track record of picking winners in later development. There's enormous studies they did with vitamin E, D, all these cancer prevention trials that cost us huge amounts, and they all failed. And I think the public would, I believe, be rightly concerned about leaving decisions for some of those huge clinical investments in the hands of organisations that aren't used to making those decisions. And I guess that's the point ultimately, is who's going to, you talked about where the risks lie, who is going to take the big risks that matter at the end to get the thing through. I'm afraid you will need people with experience to do that. I would be very nervous about getting governments involved in that process for a number of reasons, not least that do they always make great decisions about how to spend our money? I'm not overly convinced. It's very easy to criticise the industry for getting it wrong, and that's very fair, but to suggest that they would be better at it than we would, I would be very sceptical about that, I have to say. And that's not arrogance, I think that's...
Question at the back.
My name's Celine Holliver from Ocean Bound Technologies. The company is based in San Francisco, so I've had a lot more exposure to kind of the Californian style of investment, and there you kind of see these preclinical companies who have a valuation of $500 million and get $100 million Series A funding in this. Editas is another example. It's preclinical and an IPO recently. I think it has a $1 billion market cap. And generally, it seems like, from my impression, I've only been here a few months, that the investor culture here is a bit more conservative, that you don't have as many of these kind of massively funded companies. So I was wondering if, A, you agree with me that conservative, or if the investor culture here is a bit more conservative, and if so, if you think that this is a bottleneck in innovation in the European Union and the UK.
I guess maybe Mike, I can have a go. Depends on what day it is in the week that you want to look at it, right? So, but what you have on the West Coast is not, a global thing. It's for the West Coast. So West Coast invest differently. They take different types of risks. Maybe it's the weather or the food. I don't know. If you look at your East Coast, they act pretty much like the European investor scene. So the valuations that you see East Coast, West Coast, amounts of funding that is raised East Coast, West Coast is also different. So I think it's California versus the rest is perhaps where we are. Does it stop innovation? I don't think anyone has actually done that calculation of how many successful drugs came from West Coast versus the rest of the world. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I think the advantage is, though, that if they actually screw up on one of their programs, if they've got enough firepower, they can switch to something else and it doesn't
Yeah.
kill the company. Whereas,
So, but is that the right way of spending money is the question.
but
So-
if you look at something like Amgen was a basket case for the first decade, and now it's, you know, it's a massive company, you know, it's like 70 billion market cap or whatever it is. So it's, I mean, but they had the wherewithal to do it. I'd just like to come back, because one of the things with VCs is you guys are, conventional VCs, okay, they investigate a return on investment. So, you know, they don't invest in innovation because they think it's cool. Whereas a lot of corporate VCs, so these are the venture capital arms that belong to, you know, a pharmaceutical company, for example, some of them will go for return on investment, but some of them actually are investing in innovation because they hope that maybe if something comes of it, it's almost like incubating somewhere else, they can bring it back in. So could you just explain what Merck Ventures, what your approach is on
No,
that?
absolutely. So we're a strategic investor.
Yeah.
What does that mean? So that means we're allowed to invest in areas of therapeutic areas of interest of the mother company. Oncology, immuno-oncology, fertility, inflammation, as we spoke. What's the aim of our fund? The aim of our fund is to give future multiple shots on goal to the mother company on technologies that they may be interested in, drugs that they may want to buy in. Do we have to exist for them to have that? No, I mean, it's a free market. We don't take any rights. We don't have any clause on any of our investments, so they can just walk out there and buy any company that they like. What we try to do there is to try and establish more of a affinity to the companies that we build to our senior R&D people in the mother company. So at least they know that the research is being done in the right way. And it's a human business. You buy things from people that you know. So that's what I think we try to bring to the table. And looking at the financial versus strategic, I mean, it's all financial in the end. It's all about patient benefit. The more the patient benefits, the higher price that a company will demand, because that patient will be able to go back to work and utilize his or her life and pay more tax, and the payers and the governments are interested in that. So do we invest to, secretly build companies that our mother companies would buy on the cheap? That's not the thing. And if you look at all our companies, they're all syndicated. They're all syndicated with institutional investors. In nearly all of them, we have more than one corporate venture firm that also bring the interest of another party to the table. And we have to move with those guys. So institutional investors want the financial return. And that wish mixed with the strategic input from the pharma corporate venture firms actually makes a very nice format, that you have that healthy Darwinian selection pressure without going too crazy in one way or the other. I hope that answered it, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just got one kind of point to add to what you were saying earlier on about government, the limited role of government. If you and you're all viewing things from the perspective of large pharma companies and how you can have innovation coming into pipelines and how that can be fertilised. From the perspective of a small startup company, actually government does quite a lot, because there are SEIS and EIS, fantastic, tax vehicles. I mean, some of my investors regard us as a way to solve a tax problem. They don't regard us as a charitable or philanthropic. We're an interesting investment for them, and they'll lose less tax than they would have otherwise. And then as we operationalise by services, there are R&D tax credits. So there are lots of vehicles that are very helpful. I think the trouble is you kind of hit then a wall as a small company. What you need are two things in the outside world that maybe government or some higher form of life might be able to help with. One is that access to farmer mentoring, not necessarily investment, but farmer mentoring would be amazing. And then secondly, working with universities. We have access through the National Institute of Health Research in the UK, fantastic clinical networks, the hospitals, great. But if you're a tiny baby seedling pharma company with not much money, you are treated exactly the same way in terms of buying services and funding postdocs and so on as GSK. And I know, because on one hand I run a charity and I buy services from UCL, I pay this much. On the other hand, we're trying to set up a postdoc, I pay that much, and it's a hell of a lot more. So there's no kind of scaling or approach. There are just two things that would kind of, I say, make a difference. One, pharma can offer, which is, this is how we'd like you to do things if you want to be licensed in. And the other is something that maybe somebody needs to push the universities, and I suspect it's government, because universities otherwise do exactly what they want because they've got more money than the rest of us put together.
Okay, thanks very much for that. So we're going to have to draw to a close. So, I mean, sort of taking on board that, is there, yesterday there was a hell of a lot of conversation about the cost of innovative medicines, how expensive they are. Is there something that we can do, whether it's pharmaceutical manufacturers, whether it's charities, investors, patients, what can we do to, and other sort of innovative models that we could maybe adopt that will actually allow us to be able to afford these medicines, apart from obviously pharmaceutical companies saying we're going to give them a lot cheaper. So do you want to kick off, Clive?
I can do, yeah. If you look at aerospace and automotive industries, what they've done is they've created the Aerospace Technology Group and the Automotive Council. And those groups represent the industry, the government, and they focus investment in innovation. And we're only just really becoming aware of that in life sciences. We have the Medicines Manufacturing Innovation Partnership, which is beginning to do that now. But we're like 15 years behind them.
So what would that look like?
It would look like MMIP have just, from a manufacturing perspective, they've published a technology roadmap that highlights the technologies that we need to put new supply chains in place.
Right.
And they should be representing us to the government for funding in collaboration with industry.
Right. Okay. So Jane, are there, models that we could, look at?
I think earlier in the day there was a mention of patient access schemes, and I would just like to reference as an innovative approach managed access schemes, such as the one which became the first for the rare disease medicine Vimizim a short time ago, where there's a partnership following a positive appraisal between the patient group, the payer and the supplier, to enable a managed access for those patients who would benefit. And also earlier today, someone mentioned the MS drugs risk-sharing scheme, and I think that serves as a cautionary tale in that whatever mechanisms are put in place to enable better access and to improve affordability of drugs, they shouldn't serve to unintentionally down the line introduce deleterious outcomes for patients. So if we look at the case of the MS risk-sharing scheme, that did provide access for particular disease-modifying drugs for MS, but later down the line it served to reduce access to comparably more optimal treatments that later did receive positive appraisals. And I think there's a real danger of thinking that we can develop a single model or very few models that then proceed as though trains on a track that don't really take into account innovation, not only in terms of drug development, but innovation in terms of models of reaching agreement between payers and industry on how those drugs can be afforded in the context of the constraints of our NHS budget.
So, and Alex, when you're sort of talking to the pharma companies, I mean, what are you? Are there sort of other stakeholders that you suggest that they should reach out to help them?
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I agree with everything you've just said, and I agree with what this lady in the front row said as well. I think funding the grassroots makes great sense. I mean, there's a gentleman who mentioned about the risks in, with the industry, who's really taking the risks. I just see it's entirely logical for people to spread out their risk if you're a big company by going to a lot of different potential sources to get technology in. I mean, I think that's been the drive behind it. The old model of doing everything in-house is never going to keep these businesses afloat. A lot of them would be dead already if they'd stuck to that approach. So if we really want to encourage innovation, we're going to have to keep spreading out the load and snapping up bright ideas from wherever they come, including the west coast of America. I mean, to go back, I don't want to bang the drum too hard, but I do think there is a more grown-up conversation about the proportion of the budget that we spend on healthcare. I know it's a very big chunk question, but I just think the idea that we are going to solve all of the problems in the industry alone about the cost of bringing these things to market, I think is a fallacy. I just don't think we can. And of course we can look at cost of goods, we can look at cost of development. A lot of the increases in cost of development have been driven rightly by concerns over safety and making sure we protect the public. That's not going to evaporate. And I think the FDA, very interesting thing in the last about a year, explosion of phase 1 trials in immuno-oncology, multi-arm, trying to move to rapid expansion and really get this stuff moving quickly for patients. Great idea. The FDA have now started to row back because they can see clear worries about going up into larger populations quickly from a safety perspective. I don't think we can solve all of those problems. It's going to cost money to develop drugs, I'm afraid. That's the way it is.
Okay, yeah, but the US is spending like 20% of its GDP, which is, clearly, and it's not,
Yeah.
it's not a great system. It's clearly not sustainable. So you can see the sort of concerns that would be created. On the other hand, pharma needs to get a return on its investment from its innovation, otherwise it's going to walk away. I mean, the reason why there were no new antibiotics for decades was because there was no money in it.
I mean, do you not think on that part? Because I think that's, and I guess I tried to raise that issue about are we going to do those big cardiovascular trials anymore, as has been mentioned. I think there could be, that's where people like the NIH, I think, should actually step in, because if there's significant public health need but the business model looks awry, we may have to skew the approach to get that.
Yeah, well, there is that big CARB-X program, isn't there, which involves a hell of a lot of institutes, including stuff here in the UK. However, you're sort of talking about having to have a grown-up conversation. I think that what's really been enlightening about this meeting is the fact that there are different stakeholders who are having that conversation. And for a lot of the conferences I go to, it's normally pharma and biotechs talking to other pharma and biotechs, and every now and then we let the investors in and ask them to open their wallets. So actually, I sort of think there's some sort of positivity, just out of these kind of discussions. Anyway, it's time for us to go and have lunch. So I'd like you to thank the panel for their comments and their insights. And thank you for the contributions from the floor. Thank you.